Would you believe me if I told you that antidepressants have the power to completely destroy happy relationships and marriages? Well, if you didn't believe me, I wouldn't blame you because most doctors don't talk about that. But that's what we're going to be discussing today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Josef Witt-Doerring. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist and expert in psychiatric drug side effects. And currently, I spend all of my time helping people safely come off these medications. Honestly, my introduction to this topic was a personal one. So when I was training to be a psychiatrist, I always was curious about what the drugs did, and I wanted to try them. It was a funny story, actually. I would bring this up with different professors in my program, and they rolled their eyes at me. They thought it was the dumbest thing ever. And they were just like, why would you even do that? These things, they fix chemical imbalances. And they really discouraged it. But I didn't want to listen to them, but because I was prescribing these drugs to thousands of people. And so I simply wanted to take them. And my wife, a fiance at the time, wanted to do the same thing. And so we asked one of our colleagues to give us some of his Zoloft. Funny story for those of you who may not be aware, psychiatrists take a lot of psychiatric medications. I think half of my residency class was on them. So it was really easy to get them. And so we grabbed a bottle of Zoloft from him, and then we both started taking it to see what would happen. And we had two very different experiences. And so I'm going to start by talking what happened to Marissa, my wife. So she started, I think, on 25 milligrams of Zoloft. And within a couple days, she was hypomanic. She was more energized. She was euphoric, and she was having a hard time sleeping. And while she enjoyed that feeling at the beginning, she could see that it would definitely lead to some problems like irritability and disinhibition, and she stopped taking it. Now, what happened to her, I actually think, is kind of an unusual side effect because most people don't get that kind of up feeling from them. What happened to me, I think, is much more typical and probably the common way that these drugs can mess up relationships. I think I experienced the normal drug effect. I became kind of blunted and disconnected. I felt like the volume on my emotions had been turned down, and there was just this distance between me and the world. And one of my friends even commented on it. He's like, man, you are different. And I like the old Josef more, the one that was kind of more spontaneous and lively. But the interesting thing was what I experienced in my relationship with Marissa afterwards, which was that she stopped liking me. And the reason for that was she felt that I was much less attuned to her. You kind of bicker in relationships and different things kind of come up. The house is a mess. And she would talk to me, and she would say that I just didn't seem to care about her emotions anymore. I was just distant from it. I was just nonplussed. And I just wasn't noticing things like when she was being upset in the same way that I would have noticed before. And that's when I had the realization is that, yes, these drugs can disconnect you from your anxiety, and that might feel therapeutic, but they also disconnect you from your feelings and your ability to kind of intuit what's happening with other people around you. And I think that's probably one of the main ways that they can create this kind of rift and disconnection in relationships. And so eventually I ended up coming off the drug, didn't have any problems. I only took it for about 2 weeks, but the experience stuck with me such that I decided I needed to look into this more. And that's when I found probably one of the scariest and darkest corners of the internet. And that is the Facebook page called Marriages Destroyed by Antidepressants. And boy, is this place a different kind of hell on earth, because it is filled with people who are talking about all of the terrible things that have happened in their relationships because of these drugs. These are stories that I had never even heard of, and that's why it's so important to talk about them today. Last I checked, this Facebook page is still up, and the group has over 3,700 members. Some of them are the people who are having the problems with the meds, but a lot of them are actually the partners of those who are seeking help because they are literally watching their partners change in front of their eyes and disappear. I'll also say this is one of the reasons why people come to my clinic now, because they get urged by their partner who's like, hey, listen, you've completely changed since being on this medication. We need to get you off. And they're coming because of the relationship problems. So let's go on and explore some of the things that are discussed on this Facebook page. Well, they talk about the side effects of these drugs, the physical problems, the emotional and the psychological ones, and how they have led to their relationships imploding and sometimes ending up in divorce with kids living in broken homes. And I've read through a lot of these posts, and I want to highlight a key takeaway with this. The issues described here, they are consistent. These are not one-off random chance things. The consistency in the stories has risen to a level where And also from my own personal experience, that I don't think this is coincidence, because some people will go on here and they'll just say, well, this is just someone who's maybe a jerk and they're just blaming a drug on their relationship falling apart. Spend some time on this page and read the stories, the consistency in what people report. To me, it's risen to a level that this is looking much more like a pattern than some kind of coincidence or freak occurrence. My personal opinion, but you can check it out for yourself. And so what I'm noticing is that people are reporting the same thing time and time again. They're talking about sexual dysfunction caused by the drug and how that led to relationship strain. They talk about the emotional numbness and personality change and the indifference to their partners, which is what I experienced. And when I look at this, I can't help but think that these stories highlight a massive gap in medical education. Because what I noticed when I went through my training is that we would talk a lot about the physical side effects of these drugs. Yes, they can cause some sexual dysfunction and some nausea, but there was such little emphasis on the adverse psychological effects of these drugs. It's hardly mentioned. And I bet if you have been on these drugs, your family medicine doctor or your psychiatrist never mentioned that, hey, this drug can change your personality and it might make you blunted, and that might affect how you turn up in relationships. This is not even thought of as a side effect to the drug. And that's kind of horrific, because the collateral damage that can occur in your life when a drug changes your personality, I mean, it's really, sky's the limit with that. It can be, all sorts of things can happen, messed up relationships, gambling problems, reputational damage, ruining your career. I mean, that's what happens when drugs change your personalities and you don't act like yourself. Then in the next stage of this video, what I want to do is I want to break down all the different ways I think these drugs, these antidepressants, can cause relationship problems. And so let's start firstly with something that's pretty concrete, and that is sexual dysfunction. So one of the most common things discussed in this group is like the genital problems, the low libido, the erectile problems. And this is a really common side effect of antidepressants. I think when they've done the clinical trials, this happens in like 50 to 70% of people. And for some people, it doesn't go away. That's a little tangent here, but there's something called post-SSRI sexual dysfunction, where the sexual problems on the drugs don't even go away later on, which is terrifying. I mean, it's no huge leap of the imagination why this can torpedo relationships, because physical intimacy is a really important part of marriages and relationships. On top of that, if there's sexual problems, it can lead to, one partner feeling inadequate and having low self-esteem, and the other partner starting to think that maybe they're not good enough for them. And it can just cause this festering problem. Now, the next way that they mess up the relationships is through the emotional blunting. Now, this is the actual drug effect of these medications. This is how they work. And they turn down the volume on what you perceive. And yes, that's helpful when it's like anxiety and you feel calmer. But if it's turning down the volume on your ability to like notice what's going on with your partner, you're going to feel really disconnected for them. One of the things that makes this especially problematic is when someone gets really numbed out on these drugs, they're kind of spellbound to it. Like they don't even realize that it's happening to them. And if you try and bring it to their attention, they're kind of like, what are you even talking about? And it makes sense, because what these drugs do is they're turning down your ability to be like intuitive and realize things going on around you. And that's also going to happen with self-reflection. Like it's really hard for the drugged brain to realize that it's having deficits. It's the same as like, when you have someone who's knocked back a couple drinks and they're like, man, I'm such a ladies' man, I'm doing really well. But his mates around him are kind of looking over there and just being like, that's some kind of like sloppy stuff going on there. That guy doesn't realize it because he is spellbound. And this is one of the biggest problems when people get super numbed out on these drugs is they don't realize that they've actually changed as a person. The other partner usually feels helpless because they're just like telling them that they're changed, and the other person's getting really defensive. And it's only once you start bringing these, kind of tapering them off these medications that the person regains the capacity to see how much they have changed. Now, the final way I've seen these drugs really cause relational problems is that they can lead to disinhibition. So on the drug labels for all the antidepressants, it says that they can cause mania. Now, most people think, oh yeah, grandiose, hallucinating, paranoid. It's a spectrum, so it can happen at much like more subtle levels. And so this could just be like a little bit of disinhibition. And so maybe the person starts to become, maybe the person starts to lean into gambling, or they buy more things and they start to have money problems. Yeah, that can be one way that can impact a relationship. But probably the most catastrophic way that I've seen this happen is that it leads to infidelity. And I've personally seen patients who, when they got on medications, that they went out and did crazy things that were completely out of character. They would go out and have an affair with someone from work, even though they're happily married with kids. Again, this is something that the drugged person is often not going to pick up because they're going to be spellbound by it, and they're not going to realize how much they have changed. In fact, they might even feel better and well and be like, no, this drug is working and I'm feeling good, not realizing that they're actually ruining their relationships and causing themselves like pretty serious reputational damage. So let's move on now and talk about how this can be prevented. So this is just, to me, it's just crazy that this isn't commonplace, but I actually believe that if you're going to get started on a psychiatric medication, you should not do it without someone else being there who knows you well, who can watch you. So I think when like a doctor gives you a med, like your partner or friend or family member should be there, and they should be told, we're about to give this person a drug that could change their personality. It might impact them in a negative way. I need you to be vigilant about that. And if these things are happening, come back to me so I can talk to them. Because unless you do this, and unless you have someone watching them, the drugged person will not realize how much they're changing. And that's just dangerous. It's just madness to me that now through websites like Hims, you can just get a drug like antidepressant mailed to you without even having an appointment. And every day all across the world, I know this because people talk to me, people are getting these drugs in 15-minute appointments, with the doctor asking 0 questions about what's going on in their life. And so if you are on psychiatric medications or you're thinking about starting them, make sure that you get on them with someone else who is with you, who is able to keep an eye on you. That's going to prevent terrible things like this happening, where in a drug state, you go and torpedo your relationship for no reason. The next thing that I would want to add is that if there are any trainees out there or, people in the mental health field, please go and join this website so you can learn about the psychological impact these drugs can have on people. This is not stuff that you're going to learn from your textbook or any of the doctors that are training you. That's simply not what happens in medical education. And going to these groups will give you a raw, unfiltered look at just how bad things can get. And that's the kind of education that you need to use these drugs safely. If you are someone who's having relational problems by being on this drug, or maybe you're in a relationship with someone else who's on these drugs and they're changing, I think you should also check out this group as well, because it's a safe space to talk about what is happening to you without getting any judgment. You're going to be validated from the experiences that you're having. And there's also going to be tips and advice in there for how to navigate these issues and hopefully fix your relationship before it falls apart. There you have it. We're going to end there. I hope this video was illuminating into the different ways these drugs can impact your relationships. And a final thing that I want to say is, if you have had personal experience with these drugs impacting your relationships, I would love to hear about them in the comments below this video. And finally, if you want to deep dive into the real life impacts of antidepressants, I highly recommend watching this next video. In it, I interview a woman called Kim Witzak, who shares a heartbreaking story about losing her husband to suicide after he started taking Zoloft. Her story is incredibly powerful because it brings up another way that these drugs can impact people, and that's by actually making them feel worse and more suicidal.